Welcome to our 90th podcast for Thanks for Your Service. Our focus is on historical topics relating to the Australian military. You can find us on Facebook, X and YouTube. Just search for Thanks for Your Service. Our website is www.thanksforyourservice.net and you can email us at info@thanksforyourservice.net. Author Kristen Alexander has been a regular on our podcast, and today she joins us to tell us about Australia's fighter ace of World War II. Joining me from Canberra is Kristen Alexander, author, former bookshop owner, but bookseller now. Is that correct?
That's correct, yes.
Yeah, now, we're here today to speak about Clive Caldwell. So can you tell us who he was and through a brief history of Clive, please?
Okay. Well, Clive Caldwell was Australia's highest scoring fighter pilot of the Second World War. He had an acknowledged victory count of 27 and a half, and no one in Australia got anywhere near that. He was a fine fighter pilot, not necessarily a good pilot, and there is a big difference. He was well known during the war. In fact, I've been going through the newspaper archives, and there's barely a week, certainly a month, goes by without some mention of Clive Caldwell, Killer Caldwell, Australia's flying ace. He really was. He really captured the attention of the media. He was promoted by the Air Force as a high-scoring fighter ace, as someone who was going to lead our defence in Darwin against the Japanese. Yeah, a really well-known, great man.
Where was he born? Was he a Sydney boy from memory?
Yes, he was a Sydney-born. I think it was Lewisham. Oh, no, sorry, Petersham. So one of the sort of inner westy kind of suburbs there in Sydney. And he started school at Balmain, and then he went off to Trinity Grammar and Sydney Grammar before he left. And it took a while to settle. He was a jackaroo for a couple of years. He went into partnership in a garage, and then he joined the MLC Society. Oh, he was in the bank for a while. That's right. I forgot about that. That did not suit his temperament at all. But he fetched up in the MLC, which actually did suit his temperament, because he was working with clients. He had the gift of the gab, sort of working as a commission agent, and then sort of leading a team of agents, and settled there very well. He married into the Main family, who owned sort of grazing property out Cootamundra Way. George Main was very prominent in the Australian Jockey Club, so it was probably a step up as far as Clive was concerned, but it was a love match that lasted all of his life.
He met the Governor General then, is that right?
They had tea at the Governor General's house on their honeymoon. So the Secretary of the Governor General invited them along. I'm not entirely sure if the Governor General was there at the time, but certainly they were because they stopped off in Canberra on their honeymoon. But certainly they were there. But they stayed overnight in the Hyatt Hotel, which was a place that I loved visiting many years ago, and it was nice to think that they
the original Hotel Canberra. Now, Clive, what about his pathway into the RAF? Can you take us through when did he enlist, and then from his training into his service, which theatres did he serve in?
Well, he actually tried to enlist as soon as war broke out. I think he was in Queensland at the time. He wrote a letter to the Air Force and said, "I'm ready, take me." I've had a little bit of flying experience with the Royal Aero Club at Mascot. I'm ready. And of course, the RAAF was gearing up. So it was some months before they got to him. But he enlisted on, I think it was the 27th of May, 1940. But he was originally going to, he found this out actually that he and his wife were having dinner in the Australia Club, and that they met the Minister Fairburn, the Minister for Air, who mentioned that the first course is going to go into instructions. So Clive didn't want to have anything to do with that. So somehow he wrangled it so that he joined the first EATS course, Empire Air Trainee Scheme course, and he went into sort of training initially at Bradfield Park. Then he went to Mascot, fetched up at Wagga, Forest Hill, and then eventually went overseas to the Middle East, where he was posted to 250 Squadron RAF and had a very good career there. He was awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross and Bar, so he received it twice. Then they discovered his leadership potential. He was commander, CO of 112 Squadron RAF for about 3 months before he was posted back to Australia. And that posting back to Australia in context was part of a mass migration back to Australia because the Japanese had attacked Darwin. We needed to defend ourselves, so they were bringing back as many fighter pilots as they possibly could. And also fighter pilots I discovered quite recently, so that we had a core defence. So Clive wasn't alone there. It was part of mass migration. After sort of a stint operational training in Mildura, he was posted to as wing leader of one fighter wing, which was going to defend Darwin. And that consisted of 3 squadrons, 2 RAAF squadrons and 1 Royal Air Force squadron. And again, he had, I guess it was mixed success in Darwin. Went back to Mildura as the chief instructor, then was posted to command 80 Fighter Wing, which was going to, or destined to be, part of the Australian participation in the great invasion of the islands on the march to the Philippines, MacArthur's march to the Philippines. So it was an extensive career. He attained high level relatively quickly, but there was always that tension. As you know, he may have, with 112 Squadron, he was the CO, but he still saw himself as a fighter pilot. With 1 fighter wing, again, he still saw himself as a working fighter pilot, and there was just always that tension with leadership.
Throughout his career, both in the Middle East and then coming back to Australia, in terms of the aircraft type, was it always Spitfires that he flew, or was it a variety of?
No, he's acknowledged as the highest P40 scorer. He started off, he actually flew a Hurricane initially, and I think that was more like a transport kind of thing, sort of ferrying a Hurricane to 73 Squadron so that they could use it as part of their effort. But he in his photo album, that there was always that my first kite was a Hurricane. With 250 Squadron, he flew the Tomahawk, and that seemed to have been really suited to him because it was a sturdy aircraft. It was absolutely maneuverable. He did an awful lot with it. He discovered shadow shooting with it, which became a technique that infiltrated through the Desert Air Force, and then it was taught in the Australian training schools. It was a very easy method of learning deflection shooting. In 112 Squadron, they converted to the Kitty Hawk, so he was using that, and again he scored in the Kitty Hawk. He claims he can claim to be a test pilot because he flew what sort of some of the initial flights on the Kitty bomber, which was fitted with a bomb rack so that you could go over, drop a bomb, that kind of thing. But when he came to Australia, he actually had a very brief stint in Europe, where he flew from Kenley Wing, flying a couple of different marks of the Spitfire. So he did become familiar with it. adept with it. And when he came back to Australia, obviously he was leading a Spitfire wing, and he again became very adept with the Spitfire, and he scored with the Mark V. In fact, he scored or total acknowledged as 5 victories with the against the Japanese
so
in the Spitfire.
His deployment initially to the Middle East. So for our listeners, part of the pathway of the Empire Air Training Scheme was that it trained Commonwealth pilots who were then not necessarily, for example, he's an Australian, but he wasn't necessarily a pathway into the RAAF. We actually flew in a RAF squadron in the Middle East, and then he came back to Australia and was posted to RAF units. Then, is that right?
Yeah, that's right. And in fact, he was actually very lucky, because in the convoy that he sailed off to, where he went to the Middle East, one of the vessels there went over to Singapore. So we know what happened then. But yes, you're right. Just because he was trained under the Empire Air Training Scheme in Australia didn't necessarily mean he was going to stay in the Air Force. So when he went over to the Middle East, he fetched up there as part of the Middle East pool, and he, with a whole stack of others who were on the same vessel, waited for their postings. Now, I only just recently discovered there was a possibility that he might have actually been posted to 3 Squadron, or they had 3 Squadron RAAF, which was our Australian squadron operating in the Middle East. They had a vacancy. He was next on the list, but because he had, but they, for whatever reason, so the story goes, didn't want Empire Air trainee men. They wanted regular Air Force people. So they knocked him back, and then he fetched up with 250 Squadron. So it's an interesting story, but it comes from, I think, Peter Jeffrey, who actually led 3 Squadron in the desert at the time. So if anybody knew, it would be him.
Now, he was Australia's air ace for World War II, and he was given the nickname of Killer Caldwell. But what was his thoughts on that nickname?
Oh, he did not like it. I mean, initially, he actually used it when he took over a stint as the 250 Squadron diarist. So he would refer to himself in the third person as Killer did this, Killer did that. But he came to dislike it intensely, as you could imagine, because, I mean, it sounds great, Killer Caldwell, but then you sort of drill down into it, and Killer is, I mean, there's so many moral implications for it. And it gradually evolved in the press. So it wasn't just Killer Caldwell. It became Killer. You didn't need anything else. If you referred to Killer, you knew who it was. But then some news headings had it The Killer. And in one wartime publication I found the other day, his chapter is entitled The Killer. So it's not just something you do because it's your duty. The name has become you. You have become something with all of the moral implications surrounding it.
Yeah.
So no, he disliked it, and even I think by about 1942, he was voicing his unhappiness with the nickname. But by that stage, there was just no way that he could shed it. And as I said, I've gone through the newspaper articles. There's no article does, all of the
Killer.
articles refer to him as Killer. Killer Caldwell, and right throughout his life, it would be, Clive Killer Caldwell, Clive Killer Caldwell, and even in his obituaries.
Once you get a nickname, whether you like it or not, you know what, it's too bad. You're stuck with it. So
that's right.
Now, in the preparation of this podcast, we were swapping a few emails, and one of the questions that I asked, or you clarified, is that he is well known among military historians, academia, etc. But for the average Aussie, I don't know if he is well known. And I'm just wondering why, from the average Australian's perspective today, why isn't he more well known?
Certainly the aviation community know him and remember him well. And I was looking at a YouTube video recently, and it was only put up in about, I don't know, September last year by the Military Aviation Network, and it's had over 9,000 views in such a short period of time. So aviation people know him, and if you do Google searches, he's out there in modeler forums. There's Facebook and Instagram pictures of him. He is well known. But if I walked down the street and said, "Oh, Clive Caldwell," it really would be, huh? And that's because I think Australians are very good at forgetting, unless it's thrown into your face. And that's why we have things like Battle of Britain Day, for example, Battle of Australia Day. We've just remembered those who were killed in the Centaur. We have so many anniversaries, and that is officially the only day we will think about various military people. But the other thing too is, generally, I think we don't remember our aviation history and we don't remember our naval history because we have such a significant army history. It's harder to remember one squadron of 12 men, 24 men, the operations they did, when you've got so many people who died on the Western Front, so many people who died at Gallipoli. They have become our iconic Australian events. In the Second World War, Tobruk was another iconic event. So we remember them, and that's all of our land forces. We don't have really significant aviation events, and even the defence of Darwin, because we still do. We remember the bombing of Darwin on the 19th of February, but we don't remember the Bitsy campaign to actually defend it, which is it's a shame. But yeah, generally speaking, Australia is only good at remembering large iconic moments and not the general history.
Does the RWAF have a air base or units that are named after Caldwell?
Not as far as I'm aware.
Okay.
No.
Now, one of the reasons we're here is that back in 2006, you wrote a book called Clive Caldwell Air Race, and that was published in 2006. Why are we talking about him again today with you?
Because I am rewriting that book. As you say, we haven't generally remembered Clive Caldwell, and I am looking at him now from a totally different perspective. When we spoke on a couple of other occasions, we talked about my doctoral research, which was into prisoners of war, and we also talked about psychological effects of captivity, the long-term effects of captivity, and I just kept thinking about that and thinking about other members of the Air Force and whether their service affected them, because with prisoners of war there was a double edge. Captivity affected them, but also service affected them. Significant psychological impacts for a number of people. And I just thought, well, I know from my original research that Clive was affected by the war. He suffered nightmares. He became extremely bitter about some of his treatment. But I had dealt with that, I guess, it was my first book. I was extremely green. I just wondered if there was more that could be done. So I obtained his medical records, and everything that I had, I guess, felt or intuited based on what Mrs. Caldwell had told me or what I had read was verified by the medical records. By this stage, there's so many more records available. More people have talked about him. I have access to more official or the archival record. And as I said, it was my first book. I hadn't discovered the joys of the National Archives of Australia, for instance, the joys of the Australian War Memorial reading room. It was very much focused on I guess the informal records, what people remembered about him, his own records. So now with access to more records, the insight that he was psychologically damaged in some way, the war affected him his entire life. Probably he was suffered, I think, sort of moral troubling, perhaps the extent of moral injury. So with all of that thought, I thought I really would like to look at him again through those with that new thinking, that the new lens, and also think more broadly as in I was very much focused on a biography and a man, but where did he really fit in? So I've been working on that for the last couple of years, reappraising and looking with a more critical eye. I think I wrote the first book to celebrate him. I don't believe it was a hagiography, and that was certainly never. I was never accused of that in any of the reviews. But I think I do need to take a more critical look at him, his actions, and his place in the war and in our memory.
It's been 20 years since you first wrote the original book, and now that you're preparing and doing the second book. In that time, talk about technology for a moment. How much does technology change the way that you approach these things, your research, etc.? I'm interested to hear about that side of your research.
Well, certainly. I used a lot of newspaper articles for, to help piece together his life. Mrs. Caldwell had kept an absolutely wonderful scrapbook, 60 years of her husband's life. She engaged clipping services, as you did in those days, and if he appeared, she received the clippings and stuck them in. It was a wonderful resource, but now that's it's been dispersed among the family. But I don't need that anymore because of Trove. All I have to do is type in Killer Caldwell, and all of the articles come up. So that makes things a lot easier, and also to, looking at who his associates are. Before it was sort of like, I had to maybe find an encyclopedia or something like that. Google was, it was obviously there, but yourself how limited it was 25 years ago. Now you've got the Australian Dictionary of Biography online as an example. Wikipedia has improved in leaps and bounds. You might not necessarily use that as your source, but you use it as a starting point to other literature and other kind of sources to approach. So just those little things. If you want to find somebody to talk to, here's a name, I'll plug it in and find out who this person is, or trying to track down somebody, you'll generally find a trace of them somewhere. Museums, archives, most of their stuff is online now, and it's so much better. So better keyword resourcing. It's easier. One of the brilliant things, I couldn't afford overseas researchers when I wrote the book initially. So I paid for the Operation Record book for 250 Squadron, but I couldn't afford it for 112 Squadron. It was just beyond my means. They're all online now for free because it was a wonderful initiative of, UK archives, I think, during COVID, to put all those things online so that people could get them, and they left them there. So I've got all of, wherever he was, I've got their operations records book because they're
online
all
now.
online. Yeah, the Australian Archives, most of their stuff has been digitised. Well, sorry, a lot of their records have been digitised.
Now, your first book was titled Clive Caldwell Air Race, and people can probably still get it at secondhand bookshops, etc. It's probably out of print. But have you got any ideas of what you might call the next book?
Well, I kind of vacillate with that. Every day it's a different thought. First of all, I thought keep the same name because you've got the identification. But then maybe I need something different because it would be with a different publisher. I mean, I have the rights to the name. And then I was sort of thinking fighter pilot, the extraordinary story of Clive Caldwell. And then I thought, oh, I just honestly don't know. I don't have much success with selecting names. So I will just leave that to the moment that it's going to be published. Let somebody with more experience of names than me. So at the moment, I just refer to it as Clive's book, really.
Right. Kristen, it's always a pleasure to talk. I mean, this is our third or fourth podcast now. Third podcast in terms of the books that you've written, and people can go back into the podcast series and find out about that. But look, thank you again for your time today. It's always a pleasure to have a chat.
No, it's lovely. I really enjoyed it, David. Thank you.
That's the podcast for today. We're keen to hear your feedback by leaving a review on your podcast app. Your reviews helps new listeners find our podcast. And if you have any special requests or suggestions for our podcast, please get in touch. You can help support this podcast via Patreon or Buy Me a Coffee. The links are on our website and Facebook page, and your support helps us with the production of this podcast. Do you have a relative who has served in the Australian military? Our family military history research packages sources records to better understand the service and experience of those who've served. You can find out more information on our website. Thanks for listening, and thanks for your service.